Welcome, everyone. We're in now time period 5 review for the AP United States History exam. Remember, these are brief reviews, just overviews of the time period to give you some confidence. And this will cover 1844 to 1877. Let us begin. So, the big picture of this time period, you'll like this one. This is nice and easy. I put Manifest Destiny in there because the phrase that was coined by John L. O'Sullivan was in 1845, but we are going to review expansion from 1800 all the way through. Then you have your antebellum period, if you will, the causes of the Civil War. Civil War is 1861 to 1865. Those are exact dates that I would love for you to remember. And the time period following the Civil War is Reconstruction. So let us go right to the info. Manifest Destiny is the belief that the United States should expand all the way to the Pacific Ocean because that is what God wanted us to do. And here is the man, John L. O'Sullivan, who coined this phrase. But let's just do an expansion review here. This is going to be really tough for me to be brief, but I'll do my best. Just tell me to shut up if I have to. Louisiana Purchase is in 1803. This is when we bought Louisiana from the French, but there was a big debate on the constitutionality of Jefferson's decision. He then decided to become a loose interpreter of the Constitution. In 1819, we purchased Florida from Spain. And then we're going to go up to 1836, and you might recall that crazy saga with Texas. The area that is Texas was originally part of Mexico, which was originally part of Spain, which was originally part of, you get the point, Six Flags, 6 different flags of Texas. Anyway, the Texans revolt and declare independence in 1836 from Mexico. For 10 years, Texas was its own republic known as the Lone Star Republic. I would love to go into more detail about this, but I know I cannot. The reason why it took 10 years for the United States to annex Texas is because of the gag rule in Congress that prevented them from discussing the issue of slavery. And since Texas did have slaves, that created a problem. It was officially annexed under the lame duck presidency of John Tyler, but this is how I have to stop and move on. President Polk is often referred to as the expansionist president. His nickname was actually Young Hickory, as opposed to Jackson being Old Hickory. He was a Democrat, and he believed very strongly in expansion. He gets credit for Texas because he ran on that. He's after he was elected, but it was the lame duck period. Oregon is one of the areas he acquires. His slogan was 5440 or fight, and he wanted everything below that line, but he settled at the 49th parallel before going to war with Britain. And then he will be the president during the Mexican-American War. This war was fought over the boundary dispute with Texas. The Americans won this war. I guess I should review it briefly. We thought that the United States thought that the border should be the Rio Grande, and the Mexicans thought it should be the Nueces River. Soldiers were sent down there and were shot, and President Lincoln wanted to, I'm sorry, I apologize, Representative Lincoln wanted to know where the soldiers were shot. If it was in the disputed territory, he was not convinced that we should go to war. He called this his spot resolutions. But we went to war anyway. The result of the war is we acquired the Mexican Cession. This is a very large piece of land. California, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, I think part of Wyoming also. And the big debate will be, should the new territory be free or should it be slave? And then our last purchase in the continental U.S. will be the Gadsden Purchase, small strip of land for us to build a transcontinental railroad. Okay, I'm moving right along. Now, historians will debate what really did cause the Civil War. Some people will argue that it is slavery, but there are those who believe this was really a fight over the states' rights, specifically to nullify laws. Some will argue that we were simply economically too different. The region, sectionalism, I should have put that word in there, the differences between the North and the South. And then there are those that will blame the poor presidential leadership for not keeping the country together. Okay, so your major decade for the cause of the Civil War will be the 1850s. So we will start with the Compromise of 1850, another one that I could speak way too long on. This was done by Henry Clay after the Wilmot Proviso did not get approved, and this has to do with the Mexican Cession. So, what do we do with all this land? Henry Clay, along with Stephen Douglas, came up with 5 parts. The first part is that all of California will be free state. But then the second part is all the rest of the Mexican cession will use popular sovereignty to decide the status of slavery. A third part of the Compromise of 1850 will be a stricter fugitive slave law. A fourth part will be the banning of the slave trade in Washington, D.C. And then a fifth part will be $10 million to Texas for a strip of land. Okay, moving right along. Uncle Tom's Cabin was written in 1852, a book by Harriet Beecher Stowe. When Lincoln met her, he said, "So you're the little woman that started this great war." Kansas-Nebraska Act, much simpler. Use popular sovereignty to decide the status of slavery at this time. And it did not go over well in Kansas because pro-slavery people from Missouri crossed in. They were called border ruffians. And abolitionists from New England moved all the way to Kansas. And when the two groups got together, fighting ensued. There was bloodshed, and we refer to this as Bleeding Kansas. Something I did not put on this chart, but I just have to. Remember, the Sumner Brooks incident is during this time period when Charles Sumner was beaten with a cane by Preston Brooks for giving an anti-slavery speech. The Dred Scott decision was a Supreme Court case that ruled that slaves were property, were not citizens, and therefore, even though Dred Scott was taken to free territory, he would not be given his freedom. And then John Brown's raid, John Brown, who was at Bleeding Kansas, using his machete to hack people to pieces as an abolitionist, now tries to start a slave revolt in Harper's Ferry by breaking into an arsenal and arming the slaves with weapons, but it failed. He was convicted of treason and sentenced to death. Okay, I have a feeling you're going to laugh at the way I emphasize that. I just kind of know some of you. All right, I can take the mocking. So Abraham Lincoln, another odd photo. I don't know where I got these from. It doesn't look like him. But Abraham Lincoln, as I said earlier, he called for those spot resolutions when he was a member of the House of Representatives. In 1858, he ran for the Senate seat of Illinois and lost to Stephen Douglas, but he had these 7 debates all centered on the status of slavery. Even though Illinois didn't have slaves, clearly the two men were gearing up for their run for president, which took place 2 years later when Lincoln won the election, even though he did not get one electoral vote from any southern states. And he was elected in November, and then in December, South Carolina became the first state to break away. I probably should have put Fort Sumter on here. That was the site of the first conflict before the Civil War erupted. During the Civil War, Lincoln gave his Gettysburg Address. You recall that, hopefully, and you recall writing your own Gettysburg Address. The Emancipation Proclamation. Let's go through this. So Lincoln focused on winning the war. His goal is to preserve the Union. Lincoln desperately wants to bring the country together. So his decision was that he was going to set free every slave that was living in the Confederacy. Now, some of you might say, but he was not the president of the Confederacy. That would be Jefferson Davis. And you would be correct to say that and make me very proud. However, his political ploy was maybe it will disrupt the South. Maybe it will disrupt the Confederacy. But you might say, what is the big deal about this? Well, there were 4 states that were on the side of the Union that also had slaves. And I don't think typical Americans know this. This was Delaware, Maryland, Missouri, and Kentucky. And they sided with the Union, and the concern was that if he frees those slaves, those states might break away, and that'll make it much more difficult to win the war. So the Emancipation Proclamation gives him the title as the Great Emancipator, but it is debated. And he was assassinated in April of 1865. Okay, and then the last topic for this time period is Reconstruction. I'm a little distracted. I'm trying to watch a basketball game here too. So Reconstruction is the time period following the Civil War. And there are some issues, 3 big topics here. First, we have to readmit the southern states into the Union. We have to come up with a policy to get them back in, even though Lincoln technically did not think that they broke away. The second thing is we have 4 million African Americans who had just lived under slavery. How are we going to help them to become members of society? And then the third issue, which is going to, oh, some of you are going to be so mad that there is no 3 there. You probably didn't listen to anything I said on this slide. I apologize. You know what? I'm not going to change it. I'm going to mess up. They have to rebuild the southern region as well. Okay, let's get off that slide. So let's start with African Americans. Positives for African Americans are your 3 Reconstruction amendments. You have your 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. 13th Amendment abolished slavery. 14th Amendment granted citizenship, and the 15th Amendment gave them the right to vote. Remember, only black men. And Lincoln's idea of the Freedmen's Bureau was going to provide food, clothing, shelter, medical care, job training, and education for African Americans. So there are significant positives during this time period. However, there are also very detrimental negatives. I guess that's redundant. So the KKK forms in Tennessee, specifically trying to prevent African Americans from voting, but also causing tremendous violence and harm. The Black Codes are specific state laws that restricted the rights of African Americans. This could be as much as not allowing them to own a gun, not allowing them to marry white people, not allowing them to own a bar that sells alcohol, but it could be any law that restricts the rights of blacks. Sharecropping is another major problem. Blacks, if they would like to work as farmers, the problem is that they don't own land. So what the whites were able to do is rent out the land by asking them, demanding of them, part of their crop. So because they're having to give up some of their crop simply to farm the land, they can never get ahead, and it leaves them in a cycle of debt. And you'll notice here on the bottom, I know that there are other negatives, and if you wrote this here, it would not be awful. But I just think, to be perfectly accurate, the Jim Crow laws and the voting restrictions really don't take place until Reconstruction is over, and that'll be in the next time period. Okay, the plans for Reconstruction. The president and Congress differ dramatically. Now, even though Lincoln was a Republican and Andrew Johnson was a Democrat, they both wanted to treat the South leniently. I should have put that in there. And Lincoln, after he dies, now Johnson is going to defund this Freedmen's Bureau. So there's a little confusion in my chart right here, but hopefully you understand that. They both believed in this 10% plan, for asking 10% of the people in the state to take an oath of loyalty before they were welcomed back in, and they did have to ratify the 13th Amendment. It's very quick, it's very lenient. Tennessee took it over. By the way, Andrew Johnson was the only senator from a Confederate state that did not side with his Confederacy. He did not sign the Secession Act. In Congress, Charles Sumner and Thaddeus Stevens, Sumner, recovering from that horrific beating, wanted to punish the South very severely. They want to divide it up into 5 military districts to oversee all of the activity being done politically. They also want to punish the former Confederate leaders. They don't want them to be able to vote ever. They don't want them to run for office again. It's important to know that Andrew Johnson faced impeachment charges, partially because he pardoned 13,000 of these Confederate leaders, and more specifically because he violated the Tenure of Office Act. And they want the oath to be 51% of the state, and that's called the Wade-Davis Bill. Okay, any questions on that? Good. So what ends Reconstruction? It'll be the election of 1876 between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel J. Tilden. Again, I would love to go, oh, look at this, one vote. That's what it came down to. They had a special commission. He won by one vote. I'm making it brief. I apologize. Watch my other videos. If anybody's watching this from another school, I have plenty of more detailed videos on my site. But what really happens here is the Democrats say, we will not challenge the election that you just stole from us if you take out the 5 military districts. And I think that's the most important thing to know. It's been a pleasure. I have many more to do, and good luck and have a nice day or evening or morning or whatever it is.